Okay, so welcome back. I'm Kevin May from PhocusWire. We're here now to talk with Travelport. So Niklas, Andreen and Erika are here from Travelport. They've got I'd say it's a fairly hefty and a pretty interesting digital traveller research report, it says here. So, first of all, before we kind of get into some questions, just give us an overview of what you did, how you did it, and just what was the motivation for doing so.
Yeah, no, so we see a lot of trends where people are doing analysis of countries, etc. But very few people zero in on people that actually do travel. And so what we wanted to look at people that have taken at least one return trip in a year and look at that across 19 different countries in the world, and not just look at the booking part, but look at the end-to-end travel, the way that a travel experiences it, all the way from planning to booking to actually traveling to the experience at the destination. Because in a digital world, all of that kind of fits together in one go.
Okay, and what was the motivation for doing it, do you think?
So primarily, Travelport has shifted an entire focus to become a B2B 4C platform, open source, and really focusing on servicing the entire portion of the journey overall. Okay. So end consumer in mind, but without losing focus on every single fulfiller that plays a part in the customer journey.
Okay, so one of the things that I thought was quite interesting that stood out was this ranking that you've done of countries, digital travelers. So India is number one, China was number two, Indonesia was number three. You can see the trend here, right? The US, where we are today, was number 11, and the UK, where I'm from, was number 17. So why do you think, or why would you explain that those Asia-Pacific countries were 1, 2, and 3? Niklas?
Well, I think what you've seen is that while most of the Western countries, including the US, we have evolved from offline to online to mobile, and they've continued to supplement each other. These countries have never put the internet part really in place, so the mobile really created the capability for the entire population to go digital from the start. And that's why you see in India, for example, there's 200 million broadband connections on mobile broadband connections, for example. So they leaped over the phase that we've had in the middle, and that's why you see the results coming across.
Tell us, Erika, how do they create the ranking? What kind of factors make a...
So there was a great variety of questions being asked, primarily around 4 different buckets, right? It went all the way from the planning, the bookability, the actual on-journey experience, and then at destination. But interestingly enough, despite the fact that, what Niklas described, that the Asian countries kind of skipped a generation in the adoptability of digital, the US ranked really high on bookability on mobile devices, and that speaks to the maturity of the market, right? So 11th overall, but in certain aspects, pretty high up there.
Okay, so I'm just going to reel out some of the top line findings and discuss them, because I think they're really interesting. So you said on a global basis, travelers use 16 categories of apps when they're traveling. So define that kind of finding. What are the categories of apps? What does that mean?
Well, I think we're all used to it. You have your airline app to check into the airline. You then arrive, you use your Uber or your Lyft to get to and from the hotel, or your rental car app. If that's what you're doing, then arrive at the hotel. You have your hotel app. Yeah. You then have maps, etc. So that's what we mean by categories. Okay. And we've just gotten used to using different apps for different needs that we have throughout that journey. And when you tally them up, and surprisingly enough, we actually use about 16 for every journey.
That's incredible, though.
Yeah.
I mean, how do we cope with that as travelers, or do we just do it without even realizing?
I think the fact that digital has taken such a leap and that it's all at at your fingertips just makes it really easy. But that does not mean that is going to stay. It's pretty dynamic to be using 16. We still believe there's some streamlining that will take place.
So streamlining brings me nicely onto the next part. And there are people that talk about this kind of, over time we will get this one app to rule them all, to quote the Lord of the Rings. Kind of. Do you know what I mean? Will we get to that, do you think?
I don't think we will, because I think that, for example, if you're a big hotel chain, you want to kind of own and help administrate that on-site experience that you have at the hotel. Because when the mobile becomes the key and it replaces the front desk, they're going to want to manage that experience and not hand that off to someone else. What I think we will end up with is an ecosystem, though, where people hand each other off throughout the journey. So your airline will let your hotel know when your flight is late and say, Kevin is going to check in, but he's going to arrive after midnight, so please don't cancel his room. And that's where I think we'll create the seamlessness for us as a traveler, rather than us having to manage it app by app.
Right, I mean, that's interesting because that requires airlines and hotels to talk to each other, which is, that's the battle rather than a technical battle.
But well, and it's just not hotels and airlines, it's all of the players
on that
in the
example.
industry. Yeah, in that example. But I think it's a natural evolution because you have to start with figuring out how do we service our needs in a world where digital is the starting point, not a supplement to our other business. Once you have that done, you can then say, okay, well, how can we expand that to help our travelers from an end-to-end perspective and engage them throughout the journey? And you're starting to see solutions. So we've come up with Trip Assist that was launched earlier this year that allows travel agencies to engage across the entire journey and make sure they can keep that dialogue, rather than historically where you did a booking as a travel agency, and then the only time you ever talked to that customer again was if they had any issues in the journey, in which case they would reach out to you.
Right.
But that's, you know, if I may, that's exactly where the power of the open source platform that Travelport is putting out there is really valuable. Because at the end of the day, this communication, we do believe it will be a must. And it has to allow for the customer to start dictating the way that he wants to be serviced. And as a technology partner, we have to be sure that we are doing everything we can to set up that success of the customer journey.
Okay. Another one. Here we go.
Yep.
So you said 61% on a global basis again require a good digital experience is important when traveling with an airline.
Yep.
So how do you define a good digital experience from an airline perspective?
Well, I think we've gotten to a stage where the minimum requirements that people expect now is to be able to get a mobile boarding pass that will actually help speed and efficiency throughout it.
Yeah, there was just on that point. There was another data point that said 70% think having a digital boarding pass makes it easier for the journey. But that's just one element.
Yeah, that's the starting point of it. And you know, you see airlines evolving from that starting point where it ties into the in-flight entertainment, it ties into when you arrive, and it ties into passport scanning. So rather than sitting and having to fill in all the data that you need with your passport, trying to look at it, etc. So I think there's a number of these steps where the airlines can facilitate the process and takes the angst and the grief out of having to travel. And that's what people are looking for.
Even at the top of the funnel on airline websites, say?
Yeah, I think it goes across the board, because when you say airline websites, in the future there may be the airline mobile where you start your journey rather than on the website. Yeah, okay.
One of the findings that I was really surprised about was the one about voice search. So I think it says here that I mean, it was really high. It was in the 60s. 60% of people use voice search for travel. I thought
Inspiration. So
I still thought that was really high.
Yeah, and what we have to remember once again.
So what devices are they talking about there? Or what formats are they talking about?
Well, we're talking about anything that's voice. And I think, you know, we've talked for a number of years of artificial intelligence, bots, etc. You know, natural language capabilities. I think it's now starting to become a reality. And it ranges from everything from people pressing the button saying, "Hey Siri," and, you know, what's the best beaches in Miami, all the way through to Alexa and to the international versions that exist to this. And especially in APAC, you see in the study, the numbers in APAC blows everything else off the chart. They've gone straight to voice, they've gone straight to digital, and that's an important part of what you offer.
Yeah, it was nearly 50% on a global basis. I mean, what does that mean, though, for an industry that's probably not geared up quite yet for voice?
So interestingly enough, you know, to that point exactly, in the US, approximately 58%, which is still a very high number, is still highly dependent on the advice of travel professionals. So we do see that there's a bit of a, yes, absolutely digital is the way forward, but there's still a bit of a lag behind on some aspects of travel where you still want to go back to that trusted advisor that you know, right?
And to your question of what it means, I think the other part, that the voice part, means it comes down to speed and relevancy, because no one's going to want to sit and listen to an hour of someone telling you what the best beaches in Miami is. So I think that's the challenge for us as an industry. It's the same thing as you have on a digital screen versus a web screen. How do you understand what they're actually asking so you can narrow it down to a short and concise answer that's relevant for the situation? And so I think that's the challenge we have as a travel industry, is to get much, much better at feeding that back, not just capturing voice as a vehicle of questioning, but as a vehicle of feedback as well.
Why do you think there's a hotel very close to where we are now that charges for Wi-Fi? And one of the data points that it was in this was saying, you know, people will avoid booking a hotel if they charge for Wi-Fi. Why haven't hotels just woken up to that?
Well, I can't answer for the hotel industry. I think it's a natural evolution where when it was novel and new, it was a natural ancillary. And you know, now we've evolved into where I think the United Nations last year said that the internet is part of the basic human rights. And you know, we've become so accustomed to having our mobile phone that we expect it. And I think, you know, you're going to see a change to behavior because I think people are going to start to actively make choices. If there is no Wi-Fi or it costs, they will choose a different location.
Right.
So I think it's just a natural trend of evolution.
Yeah, and I suppose the roaming costs in Europe has opened up now, hasn't it? So maybe not in Britain for much longer. But the point is that people are going to be using their phones more when they're in destination, which comes to the next one, which is the 44% do use their phone in destination for various things. I mean, that is a huge thing for tours and activities, or those that provide additional services for the person once they're in, but after they've done the transportation part of it, the actual enjoyment part of the trip, right?
But you know, more importantly, it's not also the fact that they use their mobile devices on destination. It's the fact that they expect to be serviced according to the personal data that they've delivered, whether it be social media or through the booking process or the entire journey. They expect that when you're actually on site, you put your information out there, so you expect information to be serviced you according to your preferences, right?
Right, okay. And
yes, I think there's 2 or 3 things that tie into that. I mean, one is almost 50% of all tours and attractions are booked on destination, not before.
Yep.
Hotels within 24 hours of arrival, almost 60% of that is now booked on a mobile device. And then you tie those things together of people actually therefore having their mobile devices, and they're willing to share the data. The last I read was over 60% of people are willing to share the data, but they expect to get tailored content coming back.
Yep.
It's a give and take kind of thing.
And once you abuse it, if you don't give them the tailored content, you'll get switched off. And in today's world, that's going to be an incredibly hard world to compete in.
There's a huge opportunity for hotels and for those attraction providers, and even the OTAs that sold them, if they bought their trip through an OTA, to continue hitting them once they're in the resort. And I don't think many of them quite grasp that yet. And airlines as well.
No, and I think it's not just in the resorts, it's through the entire journey of being able to engage. So you take things like, if you're a travel agency or if you're an airline, the ability to engage your travelers on destinations, so being able to reach out with pushing. We're expecting heavy storms coming into Atlanta. If you have an urgent need to get home, you probably should reconsider rebooking your travel if you're an airline. If you're a travel agency, supporting a corporate, being able to reach out when, God forbid, we have the next catastrophe happens in the world. So I think what it allows, it creates the capability of changing the travel industry from where we as travelers had to reach out to the airline, to the travel agency, to the rental car company when things didn't go as planned, to a situation where we can now proactively actually help those travelers, whether that is through products like Travelport has Travelport Resolve and Travelport Engage, or other things that you do in the travel space. But I think that's the fundamental shift, where travelers nowadays expect that we will interact with them rather than them having to instigate it.
And this comes to the final point. So the report was asking, is there a conflict that we have as travellers? Let's just pretend we're all travellers now rather than industry people or journalists. It says, is there a conflict between wanting to stay connected when we're away and just wanting to get away from it all? I mean, that's a tough one to...
It's a bit of a love and hate relationship, right? So just talking earlier, we were saying you want to get away from it, but you really can't. You really just can't stay away from your phone. And it's just today's world, right?
Whether that's through work or whether it's just because you want to see the latest football results or catch the news. We've got these things in our pockets and we're still walking around a lovely location with our eyes in our phones.
And I think that is that intellectual aspect that says we need to switch off and we need to live in the present, but we're our entire generation of people, we're living for the next kick of what's the next thing that's going to happen, and that's likely going to come on your mobile device. So it is that anxiety between trying to be here in present and trying to move on. But I think the reality is that it is going to be a natural part of it. People now say they'd rather lose their wallet than their mobile phone when they're traveling. 60% says the worst thing that can happen on a trip is a technical malfunction or the battery breaking on their mobile phone. It's just become a natural part of our DNA to have that mobile device with us.
Okay, so thank you very much, Erika and Niklas. The report is available and we'll be sharing it on PhocusWire, so thanks ever so much for talking to us. Have a good day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.